May 10th, 2020. Mother's Day. The small mountain town of Maysville, Colorado, awoke to a mystery that would haunt the nation. Suzanne Morphew, a wife, a mother of two, and a beloved community member, was reported missing. Suzanne was last seen by her husband, Barry Morphew, early that morning. According to him, she had gone for a bike ride as she often did to enjoy the crisp mountain air. But when her daughters, Mallory and Macy, tried to contact her later that day and got no response, worry turned to panic. That afternoon, a neighbor reported finding Suzanne's bike abandoned near a steep ravine off County Road 225. The bike was strangely intact, lying on its side as though gently placed rather than crashed. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no immediate clues. Law enforcement and search and rescue teams quickly descended upon the area. Volunteers scoured miles of dense forest, rivers, and rugged terrain, desperate to find any trace of Suzanne. The town rallied. Flyers bearing Suzanne's image were distributed. Social media lit up with pleas for help. Her family and friends were united in their determination to bring her home. But as the hours turned into days, hope began to give way to unease. Despite extensive efforts, no leads emerged. Where was Suzanne Morphew? The case gripped the small town and beyond. People clung to the hope that Suzanne was out there, alive, waiting to be found. But for investigators, the absence of evidence was troubling. Suzanne's family pleaded for answers. But what they didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a case that would unravel in ways no one could have imagined. Where is Suzanne Morphew? And why did she disappear without a trace? Stay tuned as investigators begin to piece together the fragments of this heartbreaking mystery. As the hours turned into days and days into weeks, the Chaffee County Sheriff's Office, supported by the FBI and CBI, ramped up their investigation into Suzanne Morphew's disappearance. Every lead, no matter how small, was pursued relentlessly. Investigators began by retracing Suzanne's last known movements. They pored over phone records, surveillance footage, and interviews with friends, neighbors, and family members. One thing became abundantly clear. Suzanne's life, once perceived as idyllic, held layers that needed closer examination. Barry Morphew, Suzanne's husband of 26 years, quickly became a central figure in the investigation. On the surface, Barry appeared to be a devoted husband, shattered by the disappearance of his wife. He made emotional public appeals, even offering a $200,000 reward for her safe return. Yet, law enforcement noted inconsistencies in his story. On the morning Suzanne went missing, Barry told investigators he had left for a job site in Broomfield, Colorado, roughly 150 miles away. He claimed he was working on a landscaping project. Surveillance footage confirmed his presence there, but it also revealed puzzling behavior. Security cameras captured Barry making multiple trips to a hotel dumpster and appearing to dispose of various items. When questioned, he insisted the discarded items were unrelated to Suzanne's disappearance. The investigation also turned up strange findings inside the Morphew home. During a search, police discovered a used tranquilizer dart cap in the dryer. When asked, Barry admitted to owning a tranquilizer gun for deer hunting, but denied any connection to Suzanne's case. Yet, the presence of the dart cap raised troubling questions. As they delved deeper, investigators uncovered another revelation, one that painted a different picture of Suzanne's life and marriage. It came in the form of secret text messages and social media exchanges. In the months leading up to her disappearance, Suzanne had been in contact with an old high school friend, Jeff Leibler. Their exchanges revealed a romantic relationship, and Suzanne had confided in Jeff that she was unhappy in her marriage. She had even discussed plans to leave Barry and start a new chapter of her life. These messages added a new layer of complexity to an already convoluted case. Meanwhile, Barry's account of the events leading up to Mother's Day faced further scrutiny. Investigators examined his phone records and noted unusual activity. Barry's phone showed erratic movement around the Morphew property in the early hours of May 10th, contradicting his initial claim that he had been asleep before leaving for work. When pressed on these inconsistencies, Barry offered explanations that investigators found less than convincing. The community, once united in its search for Suzanne, began to fracture. While many continued to support Barry, others couldn't ignore the growing cloud of suspicion surrounding him. Friends of Suzanne came forward, describing her as a kind and caring woman who had been struggling privately for years. As the investigation continued, law enforcement pursued every lead. A search warrant was executed at the Morphew property. Excavations were carried out in the hope of uncovering new evidence. Yet, despite the mounting circumstantial evidence, no definitive answers emerged. Behind closed doors, investigators debated their next steps. The lack of a body or physical evidence complicated matters. Was this a case of foul play, or could there be another explanation? With every passing day, the pressure to find answers grew. For Suzanne's daughters, Mallory and Macy, the ordeal was unimaginable. They clung to the hope that their mother would be found, alive and well. Barry, too, maintained his innocence, insisting that he had no involvement in his wife's disappearance. But for investigators, doubt lingered. As the first anniversary of Suzanne's disappearance approached, the case remained open, the questions unanswered, and the community left in a state of uneasy limbo. Yet, the story was far from over. Coming up, shocking developments would turn the investigation on its head. And for the Morphew family, the search for answers would lead to even more heartbreak. Nearly a year after Suzanne Morphew's disappearance, the case took a dramatic turn. On May 5, 2021, Barry Morphew was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, tampering with physical evidence, and attempting to influence a public servant. The news sent shockwaves through the small town of Maysville and beyond. For many, the arrest seemed like a step toward justice. But for others, it raised more questions than answers. Could Barry, a devoted father and husband, truly have committed such a heinous crime? The evidence presented by the prosecution would only deepen the intrigue. According to investigators, Barry's behavior in the days leading up to and following Suzanne's disappearance was anything but ordinary. Cell phone records showed that his device had pinged repeatedly in odd locations around the family property on the morning Suzanne was last seen. Prosecutors argued that this suggested Barry was disposing of evidence. Barry, however, claimed he had been chasing and shooting chipmunks in the yard, a statement that investigators found difficult to believe. Adding to the case against Barry was the discovery of Suzanne's journal. In her private writings, Suzanne had expressed fear and unease about her marriage. She detailed arguments with Barry, describing him as controlling and often quick to anger. To investigators, these entries painted a chilling picture of a woman who may have been living in fear. The prosecution also pointed to the tranquilizer dart cap found in the dryer. Forensic analysis revealed trace amounts of a substance consistent with animal tranquilizers. Investigators theorized that Suzanne could have been incapacitated using the tranquilizer gun, though no direct evidence tied the dart cap to her disappearance. Barry's legal team was quick to push back. They argued that the case against him was built entirely on circumstantial evidence. They pointed out that no body had been found, no witnesses had come forward, and no definitive proof linked Barry to a crime. They emphasized the presence of unknown male DNA found in Suzanne's vehicle, DNA that did not match Barry or anyone in their known circle. In court, Barry maintained his innocence. His defense team argued that Suzanne's affair with Jeff Leibler and her apparent desire to leave the marriage should widen the scope of potential suspects. They suggested that someone else, perhaps an unknown individual from Suzanne's life, could have been involved. The legal proceedings were marked by intense drama and public scrutiny. Courtroom sketches and transcripts dominated headlines as the community and nation watched the case unfold. Suzanne's daughters, Mallory and Macy, stood by their father, insisting he was innocent and pleading for his release. Yet, the prosecution remained steadfast. They pointed to Barry's erratic behavior on the day of Suzanne's disappearance. Surveillance footage showed him making 5 trips to different trash bins in Broomfield, disposing of items that were never recovered. When questioned, Barry offered vague explanations, claiming he had been clearing out old junk. To investigators, these actions seemed like an effort to cover his tracks. Despite the evidence presented, cracks began to show in the prosecution's case. Key pieces of forensic evidence were questioned, and witnesses' statements were scrutinized for inconsistencies. The lack of a body remained a significant hurdle. Without definitive proof of Suzanne's fate, some began to wonder if the case against Barry would hold up in court. On April 19, 2022, just days before the trial was set to begin, prosecutors made a stunning decision. They filed a motion to dismiss all charges against Barry Morphew without prejudice. They cited the need for further investigation and the emergence of potential new leads. For the Morphew family, the dismissal was a bittersweet moment. Barry walked free, but the questions surrounding Suzanne's disappearance remained. For Suzanne's daughters, the ordeal was far from over. They expressed relief at their father's release, but continued to grieve the loss of their mother. The community, once united in the search for Suzanne, was now deeply divided. Some believed that Barry was a victim of a rushed investigation, while others were convinced of his guilt. The case had become a lightning rod for debate, both locally and nationally. The story of Suzanne Morphew was far from over. With no body, no conclusive evidence, and no clear answers, the case remained one of the most perplexing and controversial in recent history. Coming up, new discoveries would reignite the investigation, revealing shocking details that no one could have predicted. The search for Suzanne would take yet another unexpected turn. Following the dismissal of charges against Barry Morphew, the case entered a state of limbo. For the Morphew family, it was a bittersweet reprieve, but for investigators, it marked a critical moment to regroup and refocus their efforts. The decision to dismiss charges without prejudice left the door open for future prosecution, but it also underscored the challenges in building a watertight case. Barry Morphew, now free, wasted no time taking action to clear his name. In the months following his release, he filed a $15 million lawsuit against the prosecutors and investigators involved in his case, alleging malicious prosecution, defamation, and violation of his constitutional rights. The lawsuit reignited public debate, with some viewing Barry as a man wronged by the system and others remaining steadfast in their belief in his guilt. Meanwhile, the legal battle over Suzanne's case was far from over. Prosecutors faced mounting pressure to justify their actions. Critics questioned why charges had been filed so quickly without more concrete evidence, while supporters argued that waiting could have allowed critical leads to go cold. At the center of the controversy was the evidence, or lack thereof. Investigators had pieced together a compelling narrative of circumstantial evidence. Barry's inconsistent statements, his peculiar behavior, the tranquilizer dart cap, and Suzanne's troubling journal entries. Yet, without a body or definitive proof of foul play, the case remained vulnerable to reasonable doubt. As legal proceedings surrounding Barry's lawsuit unfolded, details of the investigation came under intense scrutiny. Court filings revealed previously undisclosed information, including internal disagreements among investigators about the strength of the case. Some had argued for waiting until more evidence could be gathered, while others had pushed to act swiftly, fearing that delays might allow key evidence to be destroyed or overlooked. During this time, Suzanne's family and friends continued to speak out, demanding answers and accountability. Public opinion remained sharply divided, with some calling for renewed efforts to find Suzanne and others expressing frustration with what they saw as a flawed investigation. The media, too, played a significant role, dissecting every detail and fueling speculation. In the midst of the legal battle, new developments emerged that reignited hope for a breakthrough. In early 2023, investigators announced that advanced forensic techniques were being employed to re-examine evidence from the Morphew home and surrounding areas. These techniques, unavailable at the time of Suzanne's disappearance, promised to shed new light on the case. Then, in September 2023, the long-awaited breakthrough came. Investigators discovered human remains in a remote area of Saguache County, approximately 45 miles from the Morphew residence. The remains were positively identified as Suzanne Morphew, finally providing an answer to the question that had haunted her family and the nation for over 3 years. The discovery of Suzanne's remains brought both relief and anguish. For her daughters, it meant closure, but also the confirmation of their worst fears. For Barry, it presented an opportunity to clear his name, or face renewed scrutiny. With Suzanne's remains found, the investigation shifted focus. Forensic experts worked tirelessly to determine the cause and manner of death. Early reports suggested signs of trauma consistent with homicide, but key details remained under wraps as investigators continued their work. The discovery also raised new questions. Why had Suzanne's remains been found so far from the Morphew home? Could this location hold the key to understanding what happened on that fateful day? And perhaps most importantly, would this evidence finally provide the answers needed to bring justice? As the legal battle continued, the stakes grew higher. Barry Morphew's defense team argued that the discovery of Suzanne's remains vindicated him, pointing out that no direct evidence tied him to the location. Prosecutors, however, saw the discovery as a turning point that could lead to new charges. The court proceedings surrounding Barry's lawsuit became a flashpoint for the ongoing tension between the pursuit of justice and the need for accountability. Both sides presented their arguments with fervor, each claiming to fight for the truth. But for those who knew and loved Suzanne, the question remained: would justice ever truly be served? Suzanne Morphew's case had become more than a legal battle. It was a story of loss, resilience, and the relentless search for truth in the face of uncertainty. For her family, her community, and the nation, the fight for answers was far from over. Coming up, the final chapter in this harrowing tale. What will the discovery of Suzanne's remains mean for the case, and will the truth about her tragic fate ever come to light? The discovery of Suzanne Morphew's remains in September 2023 marked a pivotal moment in a case that had haunted her family and captivated the nation. For over 3 years, her disappearance remained a cruel enigma, her fate shrouded in mystery. With this breakthrough, it seemed the answers might finally be within reach. But the discovery raised as many questions as it answered. The remains were located in a remote and hard-to-access area of Saguache County, approximately 45 miles from the Morphew home. Investigators were left to ponder. Why this location? Was it chosen to ensure she would never be found? And, most crucially, who was responsible? Law enforcement immediately launched a renewed investigation, combing the site for additional evidence. Forensic teams worked tirelessly to examine every inch of the area. Soil samples, fragments of fabric, and even microscopic traces of DNA were carefully cataloged. Yet, despite their efforts, the case remained frustratingly elusive. An autopsy confirmed that Suzanne's death was a homicide, but the exact cause remained undetermined. Forensic experts noted signs of trauma, but the passage of time had eroded much of the evidence, leaving critical details unclear. Investigators were left with a grim reality. While they now knew where Suzanne was, they still did not know precisely how or why she had died. Barry Morphew, who had been at the center of the investigation for years, issued a statement through his attorneys following the discovery. He reiterated his innocence, expressing grief over the loss of his wife and a desire for the true perpetrator to be found. His defense team seized on the lack of direct evidence tying him to Suzanne's remains, arguing that the discovery only reinforced the possibility of another suspect. For Suzanne's daughters, Mallory and Macy, the discovery brought a mix of relief and heartbreak. After years of searching and holding on to hope, they finally had answers. But with those answers came the undeniable reality of their loss. Publicly, they continued to stand by their father, insisting on his innocence and calling for the focus to shift toward finding the real killer. The community of Maysville, too, grappled with the news. Some saw the discovery as vindication for Barry, while others believed it was only a matter of time before new charges were filed. The case had left deep scars on the once close-knit town, dividing neighbors and families alike. As investigators pressed forward, they turned to cutting-edge technology to examine the evidence. Advanced DNA analysis techniques, unavailable at the time of Suzanne's disappearance, were employed to re-examine the remains and other materials from the site. Specialists in geolocation and soil science worked to determine whether the location of Suzanne's remains could reveal clues about the timeline of her death. Every avenue was explored, but progress was slow. The discovery also reignited public interest in the case. True crime enthusiasts, journalists, and amateur sleuths took to social media and online forums, dissecting every detail and proposing their own theories. Some speculated that Suzanne's affair with Jeff Leibler might hold the key to the mystery. Others pointed to the presence of unknown male DNA in Suzanne's vehicle, suggesting the involvement of a yet-to-be-identified individual. For Suzanne's family, the uncertainty was agonizing. Despite the discovery of her remains, the lack of definitive answers left them in a state of limbo. They held vigils to honor her memory and continued to advocate for justice, refusing to let her story fade into obscurity. The case, however, remained unresolved. Prosecutors faced a daunting challenge, building a case strong enough to withstand scrutiny without the smoking gun evidence needed to ensure a conviction. For investigators, the search for the truth was far from over. Suzanne Morphew's story is one of heartbreak, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of answers. For her family, her community, and the investigators who have spent years seeking the truth, her case is a reminder of the complexities and challenges of seeking justice. If you have any information about the case of Suzanne Morphew, please contact the Chaffee County Sheriff's Office. Together, we can bring answers to her family and honor her memory. Thank you for listening to this in-depth look at the case of Suzanne Morphew. If you found this story compelling, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more true crime documentaries. Your support helps us bring these stories to light and continue the conversation about justice and truth. In loving memory of Suzanne Morphew, 1971 to 2020.